One thing is for sure. No one asked for this. Nobody. Nobody is curious to see the Meg doing any of these things. And the main reason for it is because she's established in the public eye as a self-centered, bossy, selfish narcissist. One who treats people poorly, especially her in-laws, which is so profoundly crazy. It's literally insane that she is doing this show with Love Meghan after all of the Oprah lies and the manipulative, fictitious Harry and Meghan series, also so full of lies. For anyone who is familiar with the history, this looks like the most bizarre trip. The whole thing is quite unappealing. Episode 4, halfway through with Love Meghan, Part 2, aka Season 2. Check this out.
When you think about cooking as a love language and showing up as a host and in hospitality, you always want to think about people's preferences. You always want to think about what they love.
Oh, she means being considerate, doesn't she? That's funny. Meghan, who lacked all consideration for her husband's family, culture, country, customs, way of life. She had zero consideration for them. But she's pontificating on it in this episode. Isn't that cute? Hypocrisy is the word.
Family, traditions, and recipes and things that you connect to. I wanted to share something with Samin.
This episode is a milestone, though. We have to get excited about this one. It is the first time we have seen her wash her hands in the whole series. It only took 12 episodes. Samin is the guest in this episode, and her energy is very enthusiastic and truly passionate about food, which carries the episode. She has confidence. She comes across as used to being on TV. She has a good command of the subject matter, unlike Meghan, and completely outpaces Meghan's flat approach. I really think Meghan in general throughout the last few episodes, like this part 2 that we are in right now, is outshone by the guests every time so far. In this second part, because these are guests who are very familiar with making television. Meghan was previously an actor, 7th on the call sheet, I believe it was. But she was a supporting actor, and she was not creating anything. She was not in charge of anything, and she was not the focus either. She wasn't like the main character in any of the scenes. This is a whole different can of worms, and she can't quite carry these episodes. That's established. It's unavoidable fact. But it becomes more pronounced when there is a more prominent presence on screen, like Samin or Tan, who really bring forth what is required to make a show like this, which is engagement and charisma, as well as the knowledge and skill required. Even though Samin is interesting, maybe it's because I'm 4 episodes in and it's starting to numb my brain, or maybe this episode really just plateaued. It all felt too boring. It just is. It's just boring. The way they put it together, where there isn't enough substance, makes it really hard to get invested. So, like, when you're watching a typical cooking show, like I think back to some of the ones that I've watched, where you're seeing recipes be built throughout the episode and a meal come together at the end, and you've seen each of these little dishes, the main dish, the sides, come together to create a finished plate. It feels cohesive. It feels like you're moving forward with it. But the way they format this, there's a lot of false starts. You start seeing her prepare either a snack or a drink or a gift for the guest, and then it's something else. Now it's on to them doing something together, and then it's on to a craft, and then they come back to doing something together. And because crafts and cooking are two very different things, it sucks you out of it, and you don't have that flow where then it crescendos to the finished meal at the end. It kind of loses its momentum there. And also, I think that ties into the fact that there's a little bit of a lack of a niche I've begun to realize here. Because what Meghan really has here in this show is just a look at me, watch me do stuff type of show, where the only real fans of this show will be people delusional enough to like Meghan herself, even just to be contrary to overwhelming consensus that Meghan sucks. But shows in this genre need to deliver value, whether it's a cooking show, that stays very firmly in the cookery space for the most part. Even baking shows tend to sort of separate out a lot of the time when it comes to cookery shows. There's firm cooking, firm baking, and some people who do both. But Meghan is trying to add in and incorporate crafting with cooking and also gardening and hostessing. And it just isn't quite working with the audience and just as a show, objectively speaking, because those who are interested in crafting are not getting an in-depth tutorial. They're not getting enough of those close-ups of the process, what to do, what to avoid, mistakes to watch out for, advice on materials, lists of what they should buy to be able to recreate this themselves. They're not getting enough for the crafters, the hobbyists who would be interested in new complex crafts and even maybe have some of the materials. They're not getting enough information to really get sucked in and follow along with Meghan and do these crafts too. And those who are interested in cooking are likewise not getting enough of a recipe or a tutorial on how to actually create these dishes. And so there isn't going to be a huge crossover either when it comes to viewership interest in people who are equally as invested in cooking as they are in crafting. And I mean, of course, there are a lot of people who cook who may also like crafts, but it's just not the same. Hobbyist crafters are the ones who will have the materials on hand or be willing to invest their spending money in the materials needed to do the crafts that Meghan has shown. A casual crafter or somebody who's more of a cook, less of a crafter, isn't going to be interested enough to be willing to acquire the materials required to do the crafts that Meghan's showing. But hobbyist crafters will spend their spare cash on crafting goods and have crafting spaces in their homes. So that's one group of audience. But then there's people who cook, who love to try new recipes and like to watch cooking content and are more likely to either have or be willing to acquire the ingredients and or cookware needed to make interesting recipes similar to the ones Meghan shows. But there's not a huge audience of people who will do both of those things and have the extra cash to spend and space to have all this extra equipment and invest the time and money and energy in doing all of these things. Because both cooking and crafting take up a decent amount of time and spending budgets. So incorporating both into each and every episode, I think has actually narrowed the interest and the audience even more so than it would have had it been one or the other, either crafting or cooking. Also, because it's only like 30-ish minutes per episode, it feels a little bit chaotic, oscillating back and forth between crafting stuff and cooking stuff, and the timelines are all twisted up, and we're jumping back to when she prepared something the day before. It all feels a little bit cluttered and unfocused and disorganized, and that's also just not the most pleasant of viewing. And while I think in theory it can make sense to be like, oh, I'm going to do more than one thing, I don't want to be just doing cooking stuff. At the same time, you have to think about the audience. And while you might have a very small, narrow audience that is interested in all of these things and just watching Meghan do them, whether they're going to try them themselves or not, that will be a lot more of a slow growth sort of a situation when you have such a narrow niche that's not delivering enough value to really pull in a solid, strong audience from any one established genre. And so she's really limited herself in this way by restricting it to trying to shove these two things together in a way that doesn't feel practical or attainable enough. Now, had she chose crafting type things that were easier, that were more like stuff that you would potentially have just sitting around at home, or stuff that was geared towards families, little kids, it might have worked better, because a lot of people with young children do a lot of home cooking because that's, easy and economical when you have little kids, and also might be interested in having crafts, but she's not. She's doing very adult crafts, things that little kids would not be able to do, like at all. So I think that has really muddied up the entire series as far as the format goes, is this struggle between these things as well as chopping them up the way that they do. You lose momentum with each thing that she shows because it gets abruptly stopped and then picked back up for half a second later in the episode. The tone-deaf second season of With Love Meghan has been eviscerated by UK critics as so painful. Reviewers say that the guests are the high point of the show and insisted celebrities making cameos weren't paid enough. I would agree. The Times issued a scathing take on Meghan's project, referring to the host as a woman in need of some cash. Hilary Rose told the outlet, the baffling series occupied the sweet spot where irrelevant meets intolerable and made her rock back and forth in a darkened room. The Telegraph labeled With Love Meghan as tone-deaf because the episode about cocktail making in Malibu is dedicated to the first responders and victims of the California wildfires. Yeah. And Rotten Tomatoes agrees. The score has not improved from part 1. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye! Hi everybody, I'm Beebs Kelley. Welcome back to another video. We finally made it through part 1 of Meghan Markle's With Love Meghan series. If you missed our recaps, I will link them for you here. We had a few fun videos showing the peak cringe, the worst moments of the show. But now I want to share some of your thoughts. Ruth says, why was the useless tutorial of how to put squash in a basket included in the final show? Because it was actually the best clips of Meg's sparse talents. At least we were spared the bits that didn't make the cut. That's a good point. A lot of the show, I kept saying, is pointless. This is common sense. Why is this in a show? It doesn't make for a good show to have something that's common sense included. What is happening? How did this make it past production? How did this make it into production? Like that they're like, yeah, we're going to spend time filming this. Making a harvest basket? Are you joking? A balloon arch? Are you kidding me? What nonsense. How ridiculous. But that's a really good point. On the other side of the coin, it's not just the ridiculousness. It's that that's the best they could come up with. That's the best they could scrape together. How dismal. Lynn says the reason people don't like Meghan is her conceit. Like with everyone, the minute someone talks about their experience, she jumps in to talk about herself. When asked about her marriage in the Lima podcast interview, she went on and on about how much Harry loves her. No mention of her love for him. Then she says he's a fox, which made me think she doesn't think he's good looking. No one points out what they would feel is obvious. It's all really sad and ridiculous at the same time. It is a bit peculiar to say, oh, he loves me so much. Like, I don't think I've ever said that out loud about my children, about my relationship. None of them. I've been like, he loves me so much. I've never said that out loud. I've said I love them so much and like from the depths love them so much. And I could go on for days about that. But I've never said it in that way. Have you? Leave it in the comments if you've ever used that sort of terminology of so-and-so loves me so much. Like I would even understand if somebody was like, I feel so loved by him because he's so thoughtful, or he always does this or that, or I feel like he always makes time for me. I never have to ask him to be there. I'm sure with Harry, he's just always there doing almost nothing. But something like that would make more sense than he loves me so much. That man loves me so much. No, Meghan. What? Nobody says that. It's one of those so obviously narcissistic and egotistical ways to talk about a relationship that you gotta wonder if that's real or not. Is it satire? Did she do that on purpose? Did she just think like how she overdoes everything? She overworks it, overthinks it, overdoes it to the point where it's a mess at like an art project that you just don't stop adding to, and then it turns into like a mess. That it's something like that she's like, no, I should say he loves me so much instead of I love him because it'll be more unique, or something. I don't know. What would possess somebody to say it that way. It's so crazy. 007 Goldilocks says, Beebs, please do an episode comparing her to Joanna Gaines. The beige, the burlap ribbon, the mason jars, the wooden bowls, and so much brown. She's trying to be Magnolia Market 5 years ago, and no one is talking about it, and it lines up with the cookbook theory. Ah, yes, that Meghan is going to put out a cookbook next, or in between her series coming out. 100%. That's a really good point. I never really watched Joanna Gaines, but the adverts that I did see were totally that aesthetic. You have a great point. You're onto something there. Maybe we will do a comparison of those sometime. That's a good point. Sword and Crown says, one day they say, we were forced to leave. In another interview, they say they tried to force us in. I don't care. I believe that they were indeed forced out because of their bad behavior, demands, and greed, but also for antique items disappearing, unallowed photos, calling a whole country racist, being lazy, mean treatment of family staff, using a surrogate without telling the royal family. Maybe, until it was too late to tell the public they had been lied to. Good point. And that is a very good catch. Harry and Meghan do this a lot with a lot of different things, but specifically, when they were on Oprah and stuff, it was very much we were forced to leave. The freedom flight, we had to get out of there, and on their Netflix series. And then now Harry, on his BBC interview about losing his security court case appeal, he's saying, we were forced out, we wanted to stay and keep our jobs. No, you didn't, Harry, don't lie. They didn't want to keep their jobs as they were laid out for them and the job description that they had. They wanted to create something different. They did not want to stay. But these types of inconsistencies are impossible to ignore and always will be. You'll remember in the Netflix series, almost every time a guest came, Meghan wanted to have something to offer them, whether it was a drink or a snack or both. And she was really kind of odd about it. The way she approached the situation was a little strange, because typically when somebody comes into your house, you're not like, I'm gonna make you this because I sent my assistant to find out what your favorite drink is and this is what they said. There's so many problems with that. One of them is the appropriate thing to do is just be like, would you like a beverage? I do have things to make your favorite drink or this or that. Would you like anything? Because the person might not want, a juice or an alcoholic beverage or a coffee that time of day. Perhaps they've already had their coffee. Also, if it's their favorite drink, then they're probably pretty particular about it. And they don't like it with other ingredients or other ratios. They're like, this is my favorite, but only this way. Sometimes only homemade or only from this specific stores or whatever. Like, a favorite drink sometimes is very inflexible also. But additionally, just the appropriate etiquette is to just simply offer a drink, not kind of force it upon them the way she did. But Karen had a good point. She said if she wants to incorporate a favorite drink or item like the guest likes, she could always have the ingredient ready and ask if they would like to make their favorite recipe for them both so that she can learn how to make it as well as taste it the way the guest makes it. Does that make sense? Yes, it makes sense. And an excellent point, because that would have also delivered a little bit more value to the show in that Meghan was confusing the viewer of trying to host this show as if she were an expert, but then is clearly not an expert. So it would have given her a little bit more breathing room to be like, well, show me how you like to make this. That's something that you're good at making or you like to make or like to have every day. And it would have given her the chance to be a learner before getting into whatever else they were doing that day. Anna says, I am listening to you explaining the Meg, and I want to be able to take this series and make it work. First of all, I will make a list of American food I want to show in the videos. Then I will make a list of chefs. When they arrive, I will explain to my audience who they are, where they work, and what they will make, and teach the audience how to make. I will be on the sideline asking questions or offer to help. A person needs to start with a plan on paper. As somebody not living in America, I would want a chef that can teach me how to make American cuisine. And I am sure that people all over the world will want the chef to be the star of the show teaching. Yes, that makes perfect sense. Great idea and approach there, because then Meghan could have delivered more value by way of keeping the conversation going while the chef is doing their thing and only stepping in to help when asked. And she could have focused on making the interview part of the show more interesting while also taking a little bit of light off of herself and shining it onto the chef, which would have made her look more gracious, obviously, because she's like, I'm hoping to elevate this chef who I think is good. I think this chef is great and more people should know about them. And I'm giving them a platform and interviewing them a little bit to spark curiosity in them, helping out other people who are up and coming in this industry. That would have looked more gracious, and it would have made the conversation and whatnot a lot more interesting and less focused on Meghan just always being like, let me tell you another boring story about when I was a kid and did something way cooler than what you did. That's, I think, part of people's frustration with the Netflix series is that it did have really high potential. It could have been so great. It really could have. I mean, come on. You have Michael Steed involved. You have tons of money behind it. You have Netflix that's a big streamer. And you have Meghan, who has tons of resources and really could have created something valuable and interesting and nice. And she could have, from a PR perspective, I cannot tell you how frustrating it is to see her squander the opportunity to make herself actually come across better for once. And she just, every time, flops. Catherine says, as a former bartender, I would say that first of all, we don't shake margaritas. We put it in the blender so the ice gets crushed. Then the interest of shaking or blending drinks with ice is the mousse that it forms, giving a cloudy look and a light texture. After a time, this melts and the elements are splitting, giving a poor and tired look to your cocktail. That's what I thought, because Meghan put margaritas into mason jars and then shook them up and then was like, cool, everybody's going to be here in a couple hours. So they were going to sit there with the ice all shook up for how long? And get watery and gross. And I was like, I'm not 100% sure because it's not like I'm a bartender or like really no. I don't make margaritas. And so I'm glad. Thank you for sharing your expertise. That is what I thought. They would be watery and nasty. She never thinks things through. It's ridiculous. At the Time 100 Summit, Meghan Markle said that she wanted the crew to be a character in her Netflix series, which is a totally bizarre thing to say, to have come out of your mouth. But it's also a weird idea for a show like this that, unfortunately, crew doesn't really have a place in a show because they're the crew. Milan Anella, I hope I say that right, said, the reason why she said she wanted the crew to be on board is because she got so much backlash for it, and everyone watched how burning she was and used the crew to make it more interesting. So now she's saying, I did that on purpose. It was my idea. Such a weirdo. She did get backlash for those awkward moments, and she also had some rumors coming out that the Netflix crew were exhausted and tired of working for her, that it was tedious and unpleasant in general, just like sort of frustrating to get the work done. Not necessarily that the working conditions were trash. I mean, there was a crew of 80 people and just one Meghan. She can't pick on everybody at once, and she's going to try to put her best foot forward because Netflix is her saving grace. If she doesn't keep Netflix, that's it. That's the end of the road. It's not like anybody else is going to pick up any of her projects or anything like that. Like, that would be over. So she's going to put her best foot forward, but that doesn't mean that it was pleasant because the content itself is so boring and so amateur that I'm sure the crew were frustrated and felt like this is just a drag. It wasn't an exciting set to work on probably. It was probably really tedious. And then on top of it, Meghan has a reputation for being a bad boss. So she probably thought this was another way she could try to clap back by saying, well, the crew of Netflix, I incorporated them. How gracious of me to include them in my show. Although Brett says the as ever packaging is so dull, and she said she put so much thought, too much thought into the packaging, and then look how dull. That is why she fails at everything, because she has no imagination, no creative streak. She just copies other people. That's it. She never researches anything. She never ever does her due diligence. She's just a copycat. And I think that's one of the biggest downfalls of the Netflix show and the As Ever brand. Just in general, it's not creative. It's not interesting. It's not inspiring. There is not enough ideas here. The products themselves being reviewed poorly and the packaging looking subpar and kind of like askew labels and stuff. It just looked B team. It looked cheap, and for a slightly elevated price point, granted, it wasn't as expensive as I thought she was going to come out of the gate on, but I bet that was Netflix who wanted to keep the prices lower. I bet they put their foot down and said, we are not going to make this luxury prices. You're going to isolate a lot of people out of being able to afford it if it gets too expensive. So I bet that's part of what Netflix influenced, was the price point of the As Ever products. But yes, all of it feels so uninspired, so empty, so blah, so beige, so bland, and that is a huge part of why her projects always fail. Because without that creative spark, it lacks passion, it lacks good execution, and it makes it harder to work on projects that are boring too. So I'm sure she didn't have that much fun making these things either, and that they felt boring to her too. They had to have. And another element that contributed to the show just lacking a good format that made sense and was cohesive and like a complete vision at once was the fact that when it was first announced, she said she was going to create a show with professional cooks, gardeners, florists, etc. And a lot of people think that she just couldn't get the people that she wanted or couldn't get people to participate in it. And I think that's true. I think that the original format was probably a little bit more like her episodes where she had the chefs on and they did a lot of the cooking and the tutorials. But you'll remember when she had Chef Ramon on, she was really cranky and angry. So something about that didn't sit well with her. Nikki Bicky says, I think she included the crew as she wanted to try and counter the perception about her being a bully to staff, and it did not work. It won't change our minds. We see through her. She is too fake. And Elaine says that she said several times how much she thought about the packaging, how much thought she put into the packaging rather than about the products themselves, because it's all about appearances over content, apparently, much like herself. Good point. The talking constantly and endlessly about the packaging itself definitely kind of is on brand for Meghan. That it's like, well, so long as it looks the way she thinks it should look, then that's kind of where she stops. But she doesn't look objectively at it. And then when the substance of the actual product, which is what you're really paying for, sucks, then you're never going to have return customers and you cannot get a business going that way. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining me for today's little video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye. We made it. We finally made it to the end of With Love Meghan, Season 1, Part 1. I do not want any more of these episodes. I do not want any more useless tutorials on common sense matters. I do not want another crudité. Joy, not perfection. Love is in the details. I don't want to hear it anymore. This series was so vacuous, so dumb, quite frankly. I can't imagine any producer or director who's like legit out there, like working as a career in this field, creating this and putting this out there. I can't imagine any other professional in the realm of TV shows or content creation or anything like that, even lifestyle content, being like, yes, this is a series we would put together. You know what I mean? Like if we were to take Meghan out of the equation and just some rando was like, this is my concept for a show, it would not get picked up because this was just pointless. In the final episode of Part 1, Meghan hosts a brunch party with her conveniently placed as ever goods, the honey, the jam, the terrible dried flowers, the shortbread, and crepes as the season finale, sort of. But it's not really a season finale. It's just the end of Part 1 because Part 2 is coming in the fall. It was a split season. It was all filmed at once. So we just have to clarify because they're trying to do some PR gymnastics to make this seem better than it was, and it wasn't. It was not renewed. They just had all the episodes already ready. But the most prominent thing in episode 8 is the products, which do not have any labels because Meghan did not yet have American Riviera or Orchard Montecito, and she had not yet figured out that she was going to have to use As Ever. If you'll recall, that wasn't even her plan A or B. That was like plan C or D. She was trying to come up with other names and finally had to fall back on As Ever because nothing else was getting approved or working out or being received well by the team at Netflix. But the products are there, just without the names, without the packaging, without the label, without the branding. But that kind of explains the rushed and disorganized rollout of the As Ever products coming for sale in micro batches because she and Netflix had agreed that they'd be featured in the show and be for sale by the time episode 8 was out there, or around the same time that episode 8 was out there. So they kind of had to rush getting the products out and up for sale at least close to when the show came out, because otherwise, what's the point? Because they put these products in episode 8. That was like the most important thing of episode 8 was her plugging the products. But she also has Alice Waters come to help with the prep for the party, but not for the party itself, I guess, which was kind of clunky. They could have tried making that sound a little better. But during her time with Alice, it's clear that Alice was another one of the guests that Meghan really wanted approval from. So I guess ultimately it was really only Daniel in episode 1, Mindy, and Chef Ramon that Meghan didn't really care about getting their approval because she was a lot nicer to the other 5 guests, including Alice Waters. But Meghan was on her best behavior because she really wanted Alice to like her, although she did occasionally divert the conversation back to herself in an awkward way or an unnecessary way that lacked flow and wasn't very natural. She can't help herself. She did behave a little better, though, than usual. I wish, because I don't really know much about Alice Waters or her career, but I do know that she was an early adopter of more farm fresh sort of ingredients and was, a famous chef in LA. Like, she was a local prominent figure. And so I wish Meghan would have showed us more about Alice and asked Alice more about her experiences or, maybe some of Alice's personal favorite recipes or something like that. But she didn't do a whole lot of that. This episode felt really unorganized, actually. It was as if Meghan didn't really have a plan, and Alice assumed she would be doing whatever Meghan was doing or asking to do. But they decide they're going to make a salad, like a vinaigrette or something like that. So Meghan says to Alice, let's go out and get some lettuce from the garden. And she says, I prefer to just grab the lettuce with my hands when picking it from the garden, like Alice does. But just last episode, we saw her using garden shears to get everything. So which is it? The inconsistencies are hard to ignore with Meghan. She has that high in narcissism sort of tendency to just try to mirror whoever she's around if she wants their approval. And it's just noticeable in this sort of a format on camera. And for that reason, putting herself on camera in this way and having so much control over the episodes in this way leaves her really vulnerable to people noticing this type of stuff, like the love bombing tendencies and whatnot, and the inconsistencies. Because even just across these 8 episodes, we've seen a lot of inconsistencies in things that Meghan has said, particularly about her childhood or things that she's cooked or stuff like that, or, her history with cooking and gardening and stuff. So it's a little bit risky. But anyway, this is the moment that we get the incredibly out of touch gem that Meghan thinks that you can grow your own food even if you live in a little flat in the city. Well, Meg, I have tried and we cannot. Either you don't even get enough sun to be able to grow anything or keep anything alive for any significant amount of time, or if you don't have a balcony or a window box, then you don't even have the space. And if you do, then it's too small for it to be substantial enough for most of us city dwellers to actually make and grow our own food in any way, shape, or form. The only option for people who live in city high rises or flats or places that do not have a yard or a garden is to find a community plot somewhere. And luckily, they're becoming a little bit more popular than I think maybe they used to be. I don't know. I've seen more of them around the city than I previously did years ago. And so you can rent out a community plot and grow your own food there, and you have sunshine and you have a good amount of space where you could actually grow a significant amount of food, if you wanted. But that's like a very small percentage of people that have access to that. So it's incredibly out of touch and foolish for Meghan to say that. It just made her look ridiculous. And in this episode, she contradicts what she said in previous episodes once again, returns to her "I ate so much fast food growing up" version of events. More inconsistencies, you guys. Oftentimes, it's not just in this episode, but across the whole series, when she starts trying to explain something and she realizes at some point that she doesn't know what she's talking about, she just kind of leaves it really vacant and just kind of has this sort of hanging sentence that just fizzles out and is empty of information or detail or fact, because she just clearly doesn't know what she's talking about, so she just kind of gives up after saying a few words. And I guess she thinks that it'll come across like she knows what she's talking about, but it doesn't, because she doesn't actually say anything half the time, or she doesn't say anything important. Like in this episode, she was talking about what she feeds the chickens, and she's like, to get that deep, rich, yellow yolk, I feed them lots of greens. But that doesn't make sense. And she kind of trails off and stops explaining what she's saying. So she's like, I feed them lots of greens and just, because that's how you get the yellow yolks or the deep yolks. But in reality, to get a more yellow-orange, a deeper, richer, darker yolk that's more orangey, which I think is what she meant, leafy greens, yes, but you need to give them foods that have like a bit of an orange color to them and it's called carotenoids and xanthophylls. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing the scientific terms properly, but things like carrots, pumpkin, sweet potatoes, marigolds, and yellow flowers. It says you can also do. You can do squash of any kind, and then things like spinach, kale, and collards, really leafy greens. That's what's going to give you a more orange yolk from your chickens, from your hens, because duh. And she doesn't really know what she's talking about, so she just kind of fizzles out her sentence and says nothing really. And what she's trying to say, she actually was wrong about. So it would be better if she actually studied a little bit and knew what she was talking about, or just don't start down the path of claiming to know what you're talking about, Because then you get yourself in a pickle. Next, Meghan's habit of day drinking sort of doesn't work out so great in this episode. She asks Alice if she'd like to have some wine while they cook. And Alice kind of chuckles and is like, "Oh, don't tempt me." But then Meghan proceeds to go ahead and pour the wine, because Meg needs her wine, probably. And then Alice says, "Well, it's actually dangerous to drink while you cook, I'd just like to say." And Meg says, "Don't you think that's part of what makes it more intuitive?" And Alice is like, "No. It's dangerous." And it is, because you're dealing with sharp knives and hot flames, and you could burn things or forget things in the oven or whatnot. And also just like, if you're less dexterous and you're less focused, mistakes can happen and gross things can happen, like Meghan did in the last episode of putting her slobbered on spoon back in the creamer. But this should have been cut. I don't know why it wasn't cut, but I have been saying this whole series, Meghan should probably not be day drinking all the time in these episodes, because newsflash, not everyone likes day drinking, and not everybody likes drinking, and current health advice is to avoid alcohol altogether. Like, any amount of alcohol is not wise. And so it's maybe not the best thing to thrust upon everyone before noon, and especially when your guest tries to gently, politely say no thanks by being like, "Oh, don't tempt me." Like, Meghan does not pick up on social cues at all. Then she makes after Alice is gone, she makes some crepes, and it doesn't go super great. And she makes some shortbread cookies as she prepares for the brunch that she's having, which was meant to celebrate the launch of her business, I think is what they sort of said. And what she said, now it's a business at the brunch. But this was summer 2024, so nothing was official yet at that point. So it makes sense why her guests were kind of yeah, is it? Is it? Okay. Cheers. But the episode in general was just sort of as bland as and meandering as the rest of the episodes and the rest of the series thus far. The obvious problems plaguing this series that are contributing or causing dismal viewership are clearly the Meg herself coming off as inauthentic, which hasn't helped at any point. But aside from that, it's just the uselessness of it all. And this is what my main concern was when the trailer dropped. If it's not going to be useful, then the audience that usually watches this genre of show will probably not like it. And the small percentage of people who might just have it on for ambiance or like the relaxing visuals anyway, or who are Meghan diehard fans, which is very far and few between, that's not going to be enough viewership to float the whole series. Because the main money in this genre of show, whether it be homemaking and hostessing in general, or lifestyle sort of vibes, or cooking shows, the majority of the money is in people who are interested in the cooking side of it. And that's what allows you to branch out into foods for sale or cookware for sale, which is what she's trying to do. But when you alienate that audience because you're not actually delivering value in the way of recipes and tutorials that are useful, then you're not going to have enough viewership. And so that was a big mistake and a big missed opportunity. In this specific sort of genre, it feels so incredibly bizarre to not actually provide value. And it's a situation where Meghan clearly mistook the audience or misunderstood the audience, and an audience that thinks this is going to teach them some cool kitchen tricks or new recipes is going to find that they are mistaken once they watch it and not understand the content and be like, oh, well, this isn't for me then. So now that I've endured the whole series, I can say that I have the perspective of its entirety, and it really does feel like some sort of strange version of a reality show. That is what I am left with after finishing the series and then waiting a few days to write this and think about reviewing the series as a whole. It feels like you are looking in at somebody else going about their day. And we all do things differently, and we all have quirks, and nobody's perfect. And we're all just, trying to try out new things and trying to run a household and whatnot. But the format of the show, it really gave the vibe that you're looking at somebody who really doesn't know what they're doing, and you're watching them fumble about in this way, and it's weird. And this was sort of my theory at the beginning, at the launch of this show, and when we got the preview, that Meghan, what she really wanted to do with Netflix was to have a reality show a la the Kardashians or someone, where she got followed around and just lived her normal boring ass life. But the Kardashians are the only ones who can get away with having a reality show that is incredibly boring about boring people living boring lives. They're the only ones who can get away with it, okay? It's a one-off, once-in-a-lifetime thing working out. You can't have multiples of this, okay? So the Meg just isn't going to be able to do that. And everybody knew that. So she did not get approval to do a reality show. Probably because of Netflix. But it also could have been that Harry didn't want to do a reality show type thing. But Netflix specifically, I think, would have rejected the idea of a reality show of that sort of a format, because there probably would have been restrictions on the kids or filming at home. It would have been a whole thing. And they were probably like, no, we're not going to do that. So this was the next best option. It's a reality show masquerading as a cooking and hostessing show that came off like a dated Instagram or Pinterest. And because it lacked all manner of substance, it was so inescapable. The thought and the obvious fact that this was almost exclusively a vanity project for Meghan. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I am eager to hear what you think. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video, and I will see you next time. Have a happy day, everybody. Bye. With Love Meghan has been a fascinating nosedive. When it comes to a launch, a show, a person, it has been so intense and almost frenzied, the reaction to it and the negative reaction to it and all the little things in it. There was a lot to criticize about it. Even mainstream media and magazines that have previously been sympathetic to the Sussexes have panned it because it's just a bad product at the end of the day. And it's created a rather stimulating conversation around celebrities and certain nepotism type situations where somebody is being given a platform or opportunities that they don't necessarily deserve that then blow up in their face, basically. This has become a case study in how to flop. And as we talked about in other videos and some coming up, this, from a PR perspective, Meghan was trying to launch this new image of herself, and there's lots of reasons why that wasn't working. And obviously there was no weighing of the risks, pros, cons, and gains before doing this project. But playing devil's advocate, the Meg trying to give a more authentic look into her as a person or her life or her personality, and wanting to demonstrate something different than the mean boss articles that had plagued her throughout 2024 and early 2025 would, in theory, make sense. When you have something come out that's bad press, if it really isn't true, then it's easier to deny because ideally you would have some receipts to prove it wrong and sort of clear your name type of a vibe. If you don't have that, or you did perhaps behave in a way that was less than stellar, or do something wrong, or make some mistakes or whatever, of course you have options, one of which would be to apologize, fix the behavior, and not do it again. Moving forward, people love to forgive for things like that because it takes guts and strength to actually apologize and admit that you made mistakes. So people tend to want to reward that and be like, that is the right thing to do, so we will give you another chance. We've seen it lots of times with celebrities. But also there is the counter-narrative strategy, which is what Meghan has clearly chosen as her weapon in this battle against revealing press articles that have shown her to be not so pleasant of a human being. Even if that weren't fully true, I'm not sure this was the right approach to combat it. The biggest problem with this sort of counter-narrative approach that she has taken is that when she has spent several years giving her version of events, which we have found out were a lot of lies, exaggerations, misrepresentations, and mischaracterizations, and she and Harry's truths about people, including the royal family, staff, and journalists, and other specific people from their lives, those people who didn't have the opportunity to clear their name or give their side of the story or to correct the narrative, Meghan knew that going into it. So we have an individual who sort of took advantage of the fact that the people she was going to speak negatively about were not going to correct the narrative or fight back. We're not going to defend themselves. And she took that sort of power, if you could use that word. I don't like that word in this situation, but she took that position and used it unfairly and irresponsibly. And she did lie. She did exaggerate. She did plant stories. And she did make situations and people out to be something that they weren't. And this was found out by the public. And so her trustworthiness has already been incredibly low ever since then. But once it did come out that Meghan had fabricated a lot of what she had said on Oprah, in Netflix, and in other interviews that they've done, all sorts of projects, she lied flat out countless times. She threw people under the bus. She mischaracterized situations and she ignored the truth of the matter. Years later, sort of cowardly, Harry said, "No, we never called my family ist," but they did on Oprah. And they did allude to it and feed that narrative many times in the years between accusing people of behaviors and saying, no, that's not what we meant. Years later, when Harry did an interview with Tom Bradby for Spare promotion. And that was the only thing that sort of got corrected in a sort of half-assed sort of a way. It didn't really get corrected. It wasn't the right way to abandon that narrative, I guess you could say. Everybody else just still got the short end of the stick there. So the question is, now, should someone who did that, Meghan, who has done that, be afforded the opportunity to defend themselves or show a different side to themselves to counter those reports that they are mean and difficult? Should they be allowed to reveal a more personable side of themselves and connect with the public or share insights or offer their side of the story when it comes to accusations of copying or being a bad friend or boss or being unlikable? Should they be afforded that chance to do that free of scrutiny when they themselves did not extend similar courtesy to others? When Meghan perpetrated character assassinations on people that were completely unfounded, when Meghan lied about people and took years to make her husband sort of take it back or walk it back a little bit, when Meghan built her reputation on being a victim and turned around and backpedaled it long after the damage was done. While we can all agree that everyone deserves to defend themselves against claims or criticisms, and we all have a realistic understanding that not everyone is going to like everyone else, and people are going to have conflict, and it doesn't automatically mean they're bad. Not everyone will be perfect all of the time. Mistakes do happen. Sometimes people are having a bad day or a bad week. People can grow and change, and it doesn't need to define them who they were or how they were before those points of growth. At least not all of the time. But where is that line where you don't get that chance anymore? You don't get to just keep moving forward and trying to rebrand and engage and offer counter narratives. At a certain point, you don't get to do that without apologizing and acknowledging what you did. Where is that line where it's like, this is kind of the limit of what people are willing to be like, yeah, we can excuse this away and let this go, or no, this is pretty sinister or pretty serious, or this has done untold damage to so many people that it's kind of too big of a deal to just be like, yeah, go ahead, make a whole entire show to try to push a counter narrative. Go ahead. And we will not scrutinize it. Because of course, people can do whatever they want. You can do whatever you want. But whether it should be criticized, scrutinized, picked apart, what we've seen is that the general public and the media feels that because of Meghan's past actions, because of the way she's conducted herself, because of all this history we just covered, she doesn't deserve to have this show just taken at face value. She does deserve criticism and scrutiny over this rebrand and counter-narrative because of the history here. The hypocrisy is quite frankly impossible to ignore, and it leaves a sour taste in everyone's mouths when they look at the Meg like this on her show and recall that she lied about isms, that she lied about journalists and staff and members of her family, her in-laws. She did great damage to people on a personal level and on a public level, only to send Harry 4 years later to sort of wimpily and cowardly say, no, we weren't saying isms per se. The lamest walkback you could possibly imagine. That's the line that we're seeing the general public make in the sand, and the media as well. And so each time the Meg tries to erase that past, the past 5 years, with projects like these or squishy interviews like the People magazine one or the Drew one, people and the public say no, not so fast. It's a clear consensus at this point. Not just that she's not charismatic on screen or in podcasting, not that she's just not very likable or doesn't have a great sense of humor. It's not just that her personality doesn't come across as genuine or likable, at least not in these projects anyway. It's not just that. Those things are established consensus for sure. But it's also this emerging consensus amongst the public that no, she probably shouldn't be given any more opportunities to try to manipulate her image or the narrative. She shouldn't be welcomed into more projects or platforms. It's not just that she doesn't deliver value and doesn't put in effort and all the things that we talk about that are frustrating to watch someone who's handed opportunities do that cause them to fail, that are avoidable. It's also that people just don't agree with giving the Meg more opportunities after everything she's done. And that makes sense. Back in the day, people who caused this sort of chaos were sort of ostracized from their communities and societies. People didn't want to do business with you at all. And when the scale is so big and show business is what it is, those sorts of things get muddied and confused. And now we're seeing that people still actually genuinely feel that way. That if you have been proven time and time again to have a pattern of really toxic behavior and you've done a lot of really crazy, irresponsible things. I mean, let's be clear. It is crazy to go on Oprah where millions of people are going to watch and tell lies about your family who is also famous. Like, that is crazy. And we're seeing that people and the public and publications are like, yeah, no, that is, we can't really keep moving forward here with somebody who has done this time and time again, over and over and over. It's impossible to just let that go. Nepotism in general is also frowned upon in a lot of arenas because people are getting opportunities they didn't really earn or maybe didn't deserve. Not saying that people who Nepo babies or just people who get jobs or opportunities because of their family or wealth or anything like that. Not saying that they don't have anything to offer or any talent. It's just people are sort of fed up with seeing people get an easy ride and deliver subpar results. And that's kind of what's happening with Meghan. This is a very similar situation, how it doesn't come across well to the public because clearly, as evidenced by the lack of value and lack of success of every single project she has done and tried. None of it has been successful so far, and she's tried writing books, she's tried doing this business as ever / American Riviera Orchard Montecito. She's tried doing lots of talking, like speeches and stuff, like being for hire to come talk at events the way Harry does. Meghan tried to do that and it wasn't successful. So now only Harry still does that, like speaking fees and speaking engagements. We've seen Meghan try to do the philanthropic stuff. We've seen Meghan try to get involved in red carpet things with celebrity things. We've seen Meghan try to do this show. We've seen Meghan try to podcast. All of it is unsuccessful. None of it has delivered value or quality. And so clearly she has only been given those chances because she married into the royal family and then she shat on it ungratefully. Ergo, more airtime is clearly just vanity and thanks to Harold. Meghan is some sort of weird version of a Nepo baby who is only given opportunities because she married someone whose name is Prince Harry. But I'd love to hear what you think about this. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining me for today's video. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye! Meghan Markle has been pushing a relaunch super hard all year of 2025. The biggest and most notable, of course, is her Netflix show with Love Meghan, which now that the initial buzz and critiques and whatnot have simmered down, we are still only on episode 3 on my channel here because I'm slow to get things out. But it's clear the PR impact that it has had, her public relations impact, her sort of press and media coverage cumulatively of this project so far, the criticisms and reactions, the reviews and critics, the horrible Rotten Tomatoes score have, been calculated, and we've been able to take stock of that, and the public's reaction to it in general, people's reception of it, including their viewership, but also just the temperature about Meghan in general can be gauged at this point. So how was this show for Meghan when it came to her public image, her attempts at rehabilitating her public image to some degree, and trying to scratch or claw back a little bit of popularity that she has devastatingly lost since leaving the royal family. The biggest question is, was this the right type of show and format for the Meg? Because it didn't exactly work. It has not been received well. We know, we've been covering it, how it hasn't really gone down well, and people aren't buying this new version of the Meg, the rebrand. There's been too many of them. But the show itself, the format, it's not exactly the fact that Meghan tried to do a show, just in general, that's the biggest problem. It's the type of show she's tried to do, the format of this show. That might be the biggest reason why this didn't exactly work. I mean, maybe not the biggest. The biggest reason might just be the Meg herself. But from a business and PR perspective, the format of the show wasn't great because her reputation, most prominently, is that of a difficult person. Somebody who's hard to work with, who doesn't really get along with others very nicely, doesn't play well in working environments, kind of rigid and overly sensitive and overly controlling of how everybody is supposed to react to her, which is 100% in agreement and full support at all times. The bad/mean boss reputation, being incredibly bossy in a negative way, not in a positive way. Remember, we have seen countless times, countless examples where she was bossing around people in an inappropriate and bizarre manner, being rather pushy and overbearing, controlling, even sort of obsessive. And of course, hanging over all of this is the dark cloud that she made for herself with Oprah and Netflix of her manipulative, untruthful ways, and therefore being a rather untrustworthy human being. Because these are all adjectives and examples that we have of what we know of Meghan so far that have been corroborated. And you know, it would be safe and logical to assume these things have merit and are pretty true because statistically, having that many examples and instances of these negative traits would be highly unlikely if they were not true. So, therefore, that is our starting point. And because of that, the format of this show that centers around Meghan showing her guests how to do things that she is not an expert in, not only doesn't make great sense, but it didn't work well at all. Because the Meg came off very bossy at certain points, and in particular seemed to get rather irritable towards some of her guests, so far most notably towards Mindy. Even though Mindy was desperately trying to bring what Meghan asked, which was praise and questions about Meghan, and let's just talk about Meghan the whole time, right?